Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
It's really good to be back.
Today we're tackling a subject that, it feels heavy, maybe even a little frightening. But honestly, it feels absolutely essential if we want to understand the machinery of the society we live in.
It's definitely heavy.
We are doing a deep dive into The End of America, Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot by Naomi Wolf.
And you're right, it is heavy. There's no getting around that.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think, an incredibly clarifying deep dive.
Clarifying is exactly the right word,
Mm-hmm.
because I think we all have this tendency to view history or politics through a bit of a fog. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we see things happening, headlines flashing by, laws changing, but we don't always see the mechanism, the gears turning behind the curtain.
Exactly. And the core inquiry of this book is completely systemic. It isn't just a critique of a specific administration or a specific time period. It really gets at the question that haunts political scientists and, well, historians alike. How do democratic systems erode? And maybe more importantly, how do they turn into something else entirely?
We have this very cinematic idea of how freedom dies.
Yeah.
You know, we picture violent coups, tanks rolling down the street, sudden explosions, guys in sunglasses taking over the TV station.
Right? The Hollywood version of a dictatorship, the summer blockbuster.
Yeah, but Wolf's argument, and she bases this on a really rigorous study of history, is that the erosion rarely happens that way.
It's not an event.
It's not an event, it's a process. It happens through a sequence of, well, normalized legal and institutional changes. It's a slow slide, not a cliff drop.
That distinction is so vital. And it brings us to why this matters right now, really, regardless of who is in power or where you happen to sit on the political spectrum.
And what's that?
It's that we, living in open societies, we seem to suffer from what you might call a fragility blind spot.
That's a great way to put it, a fragility blind spot.
We just assume freedom is like the air. We think it's just naturally there, self-sustaining, organic.
You breathe it in and don't think about where it comes from.
Exactly. But Wolf is arguing that freedom is actually a structure. It's a building. And like any building, if you don't maintain it, or if someone starts quietly removing the load-bearing walls one by one,
It creates a structural failure. It collapses.
that is the perfect analogy. And just to clarify the lens for today, because this book was written in a very specific time period.
Right, 2007.
Yes, Naomi Wolf wrote this responding to the post-9/11 landscape. You had the Patriot Act, the wars, the whole surveillance state that was just starting to emerge. But this deep dive isn't about attacking specific contemporary actors or, engaging in partisan mudslinging.
Which is key for our listeners to understand. We are not here to relitigate the politics of the mid-2000s.
No, and if you read the book that way, you completely miss the point. This is about analyzing the machinery of control. We're looking at the specific blueprint, the mechanism that has been used historically to close down open societies.
And her point is that this blueprint is universal.
It's shockingly consistent. Whether it's from the left or the right, whether it's the 1930s in Europe or the 1970s in South America, the mechanism remains remarkably the same.
So let's talk about our guide for this. Naomi Wolf, she's a well-known writer, a political commentator, usually focused on civil liberties and democratic institutions.
Mm-hmm.
But this book is structured in a very unique, very personal way. It's framed as a letter to a young man named Chris.
Right. And Chris isn't just some fictional device. He's a real person. He's the son of a Vietnamese refugee, and he kind of represents the next generation of activists.
The ones who grew up with that fragility blind spot.
Exactly. Wolf frames it this way because she realized that for Chris and for so many young Americans, there's this baked-in assumption that liberty is guaranteed. It's the default setting.
But his mother, having fled a closed society in Vietnam, she knows differently.
She knows the default setting of power is actually tyranny, not liberty. And the trigger for Wolf writing this was her own realization that the events after September 11th, the expansion of executive power, the suspension of certain rights, the specific rhetoric being used, weren't just isolated, panicked reactions to a crisis.
Started seeing echoes.
Echoes of the past, precisely. She started noticing that whether you look at fascist Italy in the 20s, Nazi Germany in the 30s, communist East Germany in the 50s, or military dictatorships in Latin America,
It's the same playbook.
the would-be tyrants all use the exact same 10 steps to dismantle democracy. It's a technology of control. It's exportable.
That phrase, technology of control, is chilling. It really is. It implies it's a tool anyone can just pick up and use.
It is like finding a manual for a weapon. And it works because it hacks two things at once: human psychology and bureaucratic structures.
And we need to unpack a term she uses a lot because it can be loaded. The fascist shift.
Yeah.
She uses it very, very specifically.
Very specifically. She isn't saying that we're inevitably becoming Nazi Germany or that every bad law is fascism. It's not that.
So what is it?
While she challenges what she calls the pendulum fallacy, the saying, oh, don't worry, the pendulum always swings back.
Sure. We rely on that. We assume politics goes too far right, then it swings left, and the system just corrects itself.
But Wolf argues the pendulum only swings if the mechanism, the clock itself, is still intact. That mechanism is the rule of law, the separation of powers, a free press.
The structure.
The structure. A fascist shift is the process of breaking the clock. It's when the state begins to use the threat of violence against the individual to subdue civil society. If you break the mechanism, the pendulum stops swinging. It just gets stuck.
Okay, so let's look at how you break the clock. Wolf identifies 10 specific steps. We're going to group them to see how they work together as a system rather than just, a laundry list.
Good idea.
And the first phase is really all about the psychology of fear. This covers her step 1 and step 2.
Fear is the absolute foundation. You cannot convince a free people to give up their liberties unless they are afraid. It's always a transaction. I will trade you my rights for your protection.
So step 1, invoke an external and internal threat.
And the historical pattern here is just fascinating and terrifying. It's not enough to just have an enemy. The enemy must be portrayed in a very specific way.
How so?
They must be global, secretive, and impure. Wolf calls it the Hydra narrative.
The Hydra, like the mythological monster.
Exactly. If you cut off one head, two more grow back. The narrative has to be that the enemy is everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
We saw this with the Red Scare in America, or the Jewish conspiracy narratives in 1930s Germany.
Absolutely. In the 20th century, you had the Bolshevik beast in Italy. Wolf points to the post-9/11 rhetoric around terms like Islamofascism and evildoers.
It's a subtle shift in language, but a really important one.
It's a dangerous one. You move from facing a geopolitical enemy, a group of people, or a nation-state that wants land or resources, to facing a metaphysical enemy.
You're fighting evil itself.
And since evil can never be fully defeated, the war can never end. And if the war never ends,
then the emergency powers the state took never have to be relinquished. It creates a state of permanent emergency.
You got it. And there's a financial engine behind this too, right? It's not purely ideological.
You're talking about the security industrial complex.
I am. Wolf notes that for certain sectors, peace is actually bad for business. There is a multi-billion-dollar industry surveillance technology, biodefense, private security contracting that completely relies on the continuation of the threat.
If the threat goes away, the revenue stream dries up.
So there's a massive economic incentive to keep the population frightened, to keep the Hydra alive.
Which leads directly into step 2. Establish secret prisons. Now this one feels like the heavy hitter. Why is this step so critical to the blueprint? Why secret prisons specifically?
Because secret prisons are the cornerstone of a closed society. They operate completely beyond the rule of law.
A legal black hole.
It's a black box. If the state can take you and put you in a place where no judge, no lawyer, and no press can see you, they have absolute power. It completely breaks the social contract that says, if I am accused, I have the right to defend myself. It negates habeas corpus.
The right to have a judge determine if your detention is even legal in the first place.
The foundation of Western law for 800 years. Gone.
And Wolf talks about how this gets normalized. The thinking becomes, well, I'm not a terrorist, so I don't need to worry about it.
That's always how it starts. It begins with the scary people, the terrorists, the illegal combatants. The public accepts this because, well, they are dangerous and we are safe.
But then comes what she calls mission creep.
The line between us and them begins to blur. Wolf highlights things like the torture memo from that era and the redefinition of torture to allow almost anything short of organ failure or death.
She makes a really interesting point about torture itself.
Yeah.
We often hear this debate, usually in movies or TV shows like 24, about whether torture works to get information.
The ticking time bomb scenario.
Right. And Wolf argues that is the wrong question entirely.
It is absolutely the wrong question. She argues that historically, torture produces terrible intelligence. People will say anything to make the pain stop. You get bad data.
So what's the real purpose?
For a dictatorship or democracy in that fascist shift, the purpose of torture isn't information gathering. It's a display of absolute power.
It's theatrical.
It is terror. It's about terrorizing the population. If you know the state can do that to a human being and get away with it, you become docile. You self-censor. It connects back to that fragility blind spot. We think, oh, they only do that to the bad guys.
But history shows that the category of bad guys inevitably expands.
Inevitably. First it's terrorists, then it's sympathizers, then it's political dissidents, then it's anyone the leader happens to dislike. The category always grows.
So we have fear as the foundation,
Yeah.
and we have a black hole in the legal system to put the people we fear. Now we need the muscle.
The apparatus of control.
This brings us to the next grouping in her blueprint, steps 3, 4, and 5. And step 3 is develop a paramilitary force.
This addresses a systemic problem that would-be dictators always face. Your regular army, your national military, is generally loyal to the Constitution or the nation, not necessarily to the specific leader in charge at that moment.
They have institutional memory, they have codes of honor. They might actually refuse an illegal order to fire on their own people.
Exactly. If you want to oppress your own citizens, the regular army is an unreliable tool. They are citizens too. So what do? You need a force loyal only to you. You need a Praetorian Guard.
And Wolf points to the privatization of violence here. Companies like Blackwater, back in the day.
Yes. The rise of private security contractors. These are forces that operate with immunity. Wolf cites their presence in, for example, post-Katrina New Orleans as a domestic example.
They were patrolling American streets.
Patrolling American streets, fully armed, but they aren't accountable to the public in the same way the National Guard is. You can't file a Freedom of Information Act request with a private company the way you can with the Army.
It's not just corporate mercenaries either. She also talks about thug castes.
Right. And this is the use of organized mobs to physically intimidate democratic processes. She gives the example of the Brooks Brothers riot in Florida back in 2000, organized political operatives being used to physically stop the vote recount.
Historically, you see this with the black shirts in Italy or the brown shirts in Germany.
Always. They start as security for the party rallies, and they end up being the enforcers of the state on the street level, operating with a wink and a nod from the authorities.
It's terrifying to think about private armies operating on domestic soil. But step 4 is maybe even more pervasive because it's invisible. Surveil ordinary citizens.
This is where modern technology really accelerates the fascist shift. Wolf describes the Iron Triangle model she saw in China. It's the surveillance of your residence, your work, and your personnel files. It's the total integration of all your data.
But here's the kicker, and I think this is her most important point on this. The state doesn't actually have to watch everyone, right?
That is the key insight. It's not necessary to watch everyone all the time. The state doesn't have the manpower or the server space to listen to every phone call or read every text message.
It's the panopticon effect.
Explain that for the listeners because it's such a crucial concept.
The panopticon was a prison design proposed by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. The cells are arranged in a circle around a central guard tower, and the tower's windows are tinted.
So the prisoners can't see in?
Right. They never know if the guard is watching them specifically or looking at another cell or even there at all.
Yeah.
So because they might be watched at any moment, they behave as if they are being watched every moment.
Perfect. That is exactly it. It is only necessary that citizens think they might be watched. If you think your emails are being read or your library records are being checked or your neighbors are reporting on you, you police yourself.
You stop signing that petition. You don't go to that meeting. You don't write that op-ed. You pause before you hit send on a joke about a politician.
It creates a chilling effect.
Yeah.
Liberty dies not because the police stop you, but because you stopped yourself. You internalize the oppressor.
And she mentions the TIPS program, Terrorism Information and Prevention System, which was literally designed to have neighbors spying on neighbors. Your cable guy reporting on what he saw in your house.
Which is a classic totalitarian tactic. The East German Stasi didn't just have officers. They had thousands and thousands of informal collaborators. It destroys the very fabric of trust in a society.
If I can't trust you.
I can't organize with you to oppose the state. Which leads right into step 5. Infiltrate citizens groups.
This is the one that really makes collective action impossible.
It does. If you are at a peace rally or a church meeting or a political organizing event and you suspect that the person standing next to you might be an agent provocateur or a spy, the movement just crumbles from within.
Wolf cites ACLU reports from that time about police infiltrating anti-war protests. And she talks about the Department of Defense's Talon database, which was tracking student groups.
And the systemic result is paranoia. When you break the trust between citizens, the state becomes the only entity left standing. It effectively atomizes the population. You're just alone with your fear.
So let's recap the board here. The state now has the muscle, the paramilitaries. It has the eyes, the surveillance. And it has the ears, the infiltration.
The whole apparatus of control.
So what do they do with it? They go after the voices. This is what she calls the war on dissent, and it's step 6, 7, and 8. Step 6 is arbitrarily detain and release citizens.
This one is a pure psychological weapon. Wolf shares her own experience here, and many others, of being put on the list, getting that SSS on your boarding pass at the airport.
Right, the quadruple S. You get pulled aside, you're searched, you're delayed, maybe questioned for hours, and then they just let you go.
It looks like incompetence, or maybe just security theater. But she argues it's systemic harassment. It's the terror of unpredictability.
But why is randomness useful to a would-be dictator?
Because if the rules are clear, like don't rob a bank, you know how to stay safe, you just don't rob a bank. But if the rules are arbitrary, if you can be detained for your name or your travel history or a book you bought or just a clerical error, then everyone is constantly walking on eggshells.
It exhausts civil society. It makes the cost of participation too high for the average person.
Exactly. You just want to keep your head down and get through the airport without any trouble. It discourages dissent by making it inconvenient and frightening.
And while they harass the regular folks to wear them down, they go after the leaders. Step 7, target key individuals.
And it's always the same list, historically. It's not a mystery. It's academics, artists, journalists, and clergy.
Why them? Why not the politicians first?
Because these are the people who have the platform and the credibility to challenge the state's narrative outside of the formal political system. They are the truth tellers. They're often seen as the conscience of the nation.
And Wolf talks about the Dixie Chicks being blacklisted from the radio for criticizing the president, or scientists losing their grants for publishing inconvenient research.
Right. It's rarely about firing squads, at least not in the early stages. It's about professional ruin. It's about public shaming. If a scientist loses their funding because their research contradicts government policy, or a professor gets fired for an unpatriotic essay,
it sends a signal to everyone else in that profession. Keep your head down, or you're next.
It creates a massive feedback loop. Making an example of one high-profile figure effectively silences thousands of ordinary people who are watching. It's the tall poppy syndrome. You cut down the tallest flowers, and the rest of the field stays low to the ground.
Exactly. And to control the narrative completely, you have to control the storytellers themselves, which is step 8. Restrict the press.
This usually follows a very clear progression. It's not like they just shut down the New York Times on day one.
No, that would cause a revolt.
It's a boil the frog situation. First, it's just access denial. You freeze out the critics. You don't call on them in the press briefing. You isolate them, make them seem irrelevant.
Then it escalates.
Then it escalates to smear campaigns. Wolf brings up the outing of Valerie Plame, a covert CIA agent, as a way to punish her husband for criticizing the war rationale. That's weaponizing classified information to destroy a critic.
And from there, it moves to outright criminalization.
Yes, threatening reporters with the Espionage Act, saying if you publish this leak, you are aiding the enemy. It reframes the entire act of journalism as a crime against the state.
She also touches on fake news here, but in a way that feels incredibly prescient for a book that was written back in 2007.
She really does. She talks about information warfare, the flood of fake news and fake documents, and she introduces this concept of fascist lying.
What does she mean by that? How's it different from just, regular political lying?
Regular political lying is usually to hide a mistake or a scandal. I didn't have that affair. I didn't steal that money. It's defensive.
Okay.
Fascist lying isn't just about deceiving the public. It is about asserting power over reality itself. If the state can make you believe that a rescue was heroic when it was actually staged, like the Jessica Lynch narrative she discusses, or that documents proving a threat are real when they are forgeries,
They own your mind.
they own your mind. If they can make you believe that 2 + 2 = 5, you are no longer a citizen capable of critical thought. You are a subject. You're completely unmoored from reality.
That is the ultimate gaslighting. And once you control reality, you can move to the final consolidation of power. Steps 9 and 10.
The final turn of the screw.
Step 9 is cast criticism as espionage. and dissent as treason.
This is the linguistic shift that precedes the final legal crackdown. You redefine the very concept of opposition as aiding the enemy.
It's no longer a legitimate political disagreement.
No, it's betrayal. Wolf points out the danger of using a law like the 1917 Espionage Act to prosecute whistleblowers and journalists. It creates a third rail of speech. If criticizing the war or the government's policy is legally framed as treason, then democratic debate dies.
It creates a binary. You are either with us or you are a traitor. There's no middle ground.
No room for loyal opposition. And finally, the endgame. Step 10. Subvert the rule of law.
This is where it all comes together.
This is where the executive branch simply claims the right to bypass laws altogether. Wolf discusses signing statements, where a president signs a law passed by Congress but simultaneously adds a note saying he interprets it in a way that allows him to ignore the parts he doesn't like.
It's basically crossing your fingers behind your back while you sign a legal contract.
Pretty much. It's the executive saying, I am the law, not the text that was passed. Or you see it in the firing of U.S. attorneys who weren't deemed loyal enough to the administration.
A political purge of the Justice Department.
Exactly. If the people who are supposed to enforce the law are only loyal to the leader and not to the law itself, then the rule of law is effectively gone.
And Wolf also warns about the legal framework for martial law being put in place.
Yes, legislation that allows the president to station troops domestically and to override state governors during emergencies. She has this incredible phrase for it. She calls it a paper coup.
A paper coup. That's a sticky phrase.
It is. It implies that a coup doesn't have to look violent. It can look bureaucratic. It involves lawyers and memos and legislative clauses. But the result is a legal takeover that ends democracy just as effectively as a tank on the White House lawn.
It's a coup by paperwork.
That's the chilling part, that it can happen with the appearance of legality.
So we've walked through the 10 steps. It's a grim picture. But let's connect this to the present day and the broader crisis and perception themes of our project.
Well, what stands out most clearly is the recurrence of patterns. The fascist shift is, as we said, a technology. It's repeatable. And Wolf talks about a tipping point, that moment when the pressure on the institutions becomes too great and the new closed reality just sort of solidifies.
But the most important insight for us, I think, is about perception management.
Yeah.
How do the people living through this perceive it? Do they even know it's happening?
Often they don't, and that's the scary part. Wolf mentions the diaries of Victor Klemperer in Nazi Germany.
I remember this part of the book. Klemperer was a Jewish professor, and he was documenting his daily life during the rise of the Third Reich.
Yes, and his diaries are so fascinating because he documents how normal daily life often looked and felt. He was still going to the movies, he was still worrying about his car or his garden, and meanwhile, all around him, rights were being stripped away, people were disappearing.
So Wolf's observation is that citizens often misinterpret these huge structural shifts as just isolated scandals.
Exactly. We see a news story about illegal wiretapping and we think, oh, that's a scandal. Someone will get fired. We don't see it as step 4 in a coherent system of control being put into place.
We fail to connect the dots. We see the pixels, but we don't see the whole picture.
And this is a core theme for us. Systemic failure happens quietly. Democracy is not a default condition. We have this idea that the natural state of humanity is freedom.
And history suggests otherwise.
History screams otherwise. The natural state of power is to consolidate itself. Democracy is a maintenance project. It requires constant energy to keep the entropy of tyranny at bay.
Will talks about the American founders in this context. They weren't these supremely confident guys who thought they'd solve governance forever. They were actually terrified.
They were terrified of tyranny. They feared the executive branch more than anything else. They designed the system to be difficult, to have friction and checks and balances, precisely because they knew that power corrupts.
And Wolf argues that in modern times, we have subcontractor our liberty.
That's a great phrase.
What does she mean by that? Subcontracted.
We've outsourced the job of being a patriot to professionals, to lawyers, to politicians, to the ACLU. We think, oh, if they'll handle it, I'll just go to work and watch Netflix. But Wolf argues we have to reclaim the patriot's task.
The citizen leader.
Yes. The idea that the definition of a patriot isn't just saluting the flag, it's being the one who stands up when the state overreaches. It's recognizing that the security provided by a tyrant is just an illusion.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's reflect on the so what for the listener. Why does this blueprint matter if we're not currently living in a full-blown dictatorship?
Because the infrastructure is built. That, to me, is the most provocative thought to leave everyone with. Imagine the what-ifs. Wolf asks us to imagine, what if a new major crisis occurs? A massive cyber attack, a new pandemic, another major terror incident?
The legal structures for mass surveillance are already there. The legal framework for secret detention is there. The unaccountable paramilitary forces, the private contractors are there.
Exactly. What prevents a total lockdown? The key insight isn't about the person who is in charge right now. It is about the powers that have been left on the table for anyone to pick up.
It's like leaving a loaded gun on the coffee table. You might trust the person sitting in the room now not to use it, but what about the next person who walks in? Or the person after that?
That's it. That's the whole point. Vigilance is not emotional, it's structural. If we allow the structure of liberty to be dismantled because we're afraid or because we happen to trust the current person in charge, we are leaving a loaded weapon for the next person, whoever that may be.
That is a powerful and, frankly, sobering place to land. This isn't about panic. It's about seeing the system clearly so we can maintain it.
Knowledge is the only real defense against this specific technology of control. Once you see the blueprint, you can't unsee it, and that is the first step in being able to stop it.
We owe a huge debt to Naomi Wolf for this rigorous historical analysis. The book is The End of America. Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot. It is well worth checking out from your local library to see the full depth of her research.
Absolutely. It's a must-read.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for listening.